My name is Sarah, and for as long as I can remember, my life has been defined by a single story, a tragedy that shaped everything I became. My mother told me that when I was just 4 years old, our family was torn apart in a terrible car accident. She said my father, my older brother, and my baby sister had all died that night, leaving only me alive. I grew up with those words carved into my identity like a scar. I wasn't just Sarah, I was Sarah, the girl who lost her family, the girl who survived when no one else did. My mother used to describe the accident in hushed tones, her voice trembling as if the memories were too painful to relive. She said it happened on a rainy night, the roads slick with water, headlights blinding in the storm. She said the car had skidded, flipped, and crumpled like paper. She said she had been driving behind them, powerless to save them, forced to watch her whole world collapse in an instant. I remember sitting on her lap as a child, her arms wrapped tightly around me as she whispered, "You're all I have left, Sarah. You're my miracle," and I believed her. I carried that guilt, that strange mix of sorrow and gratitude, deep in my heart. As I grew older, the story became part of me. Every birthday felt heavy, every holiday tinged with emptiness. I used to stare at the empty chairs at Christmas dinner and imagine what it would have been like if they were still here. A father at the head of the table, a brother teasing me, stealing the last cookie, a sister giggling in her high chair. Instead, there was just silence, just me and Mom. I envied other kids who complained about their siblings or rolled their eyes at their dads. I wanted that normal chaos, that noise, that love that stretched across more than one person. But instead, I had only my mother, and the echo of a family that never got the chance to exist in my memory. My mom kept no photos of them. When I asked why, she said it was too painful, that looking at their faces would break her all over again. She claimed she had thrown everything away, the albums, the keepsakes, even the baby clothes. "The memories hurt too much, Sarah," she'd say, her eyes glistening. "Sometimes the only way to survive is to let go." And I trusted her. She was all I had. But that trust came at a price. I grew up with shadows instead of answers. I never knew what my father's laugh sounded like, what my brother's favorite color was, or what lullabies my sister might have fallen asleep to. All I knew was loss. All I knew was absence. Teachers used to call me quiet or serious. Friends' parents would sometimes glance at me with pity when they learned my story. And I carried that identity, wearing it like a cloak I could never take off. The survivor, the girl who was spared. Sometimes, late at night, I would imagine the accident. Even though I had no real memory of it, my mind would conjure images of twisted metal, broken glass, flashing lights. I would wake up sweating, my heart pounding, convinced that I could almost hear their voices calling out to me. My mother never remarried. She never even dated. It was as if she had locked her heart away in the same vault where she had buried the past. "We don't need anyone else," she would tell me firmly whenever I asked. "We have each other. That's enough." And so, I grew up believing that my life was built on tragedy, that everything I was, my strength, my independence, even my loneliness, came from surviving something no child should ever endure. For years, I never questioned it. Why would I? When your whole world rests on the words of the one person you trust the most, you don't look for cracks in the story. But now, looking back, I realized something chilling. It wasn't just tragedy that defined me. It was the silence, the gaps, the questions I never asked because I was too afraid of hurting the only person I had left. And those unanswered questions were waiting for me, buried beneath decades of lies, ready to tear apart the fragile life I thought was real. Growing up without a family is not just about the absence of people. It's about the absence of stories, traditions, and roots. While other kids learned who they were through bedtime tales about their grandparents, through the jokes their uncles told at family dinners, or through the way their siblings argued in the back seat of the car, my identity was built on silence. Silence, and the single narrative my mother repeated to me again and again. "We only have each other now, Sarah." Don't ever forget that at school I learned quickly how different I was. During family tree projects, while my classmates proudly glued photos of their siblings and parents onto construction paper, I had only one picture to offer: me and my mom. Teachers would pat my shoulder kindly, offering words like, "You're so strong," but even as a child, I hated that word. Strong wasn't what I wanted to be. I wanted to be normal. Birthdays were the hardest. Other kids threw parties with balloons, cousins, siblings, noise, and laughter. For me, birthdays were quiet dinners with Mom, a small cake, and a gift carefully wrapped. She always tried her best, but I could see the sadness in her eyes, the way her smile faltered when she lit the candles. It was as though every celebration was also a reminder of what we didn't have. Holidays felt even emptier. Christmas morning was just the two of us under a small tree, exchanging gifts in silence while the world outside was alive with families gathering together. Thanksgiving was a single roasted chicken instead of a turkey, eaten at a table where 3 seats remained empty in my imagination. I used to pretend I could hear my father's deep voice telling stories, my brother making jokes, my little sister clapping her hands at the noise. But when I opened my eyes, it was always just me and Mom, the sound of her fork scraping the plate. My mother never encouraged me to ask questions. In fact, she discouraged it. Whenever I wanted to know what my father had been like, or how my brother had acted, she grew tense. "Sarah, it's better not to dwell on the past," she would say, her voice sharp, final. If I pressed further, she would leave the room. I learned quickly that curiosity only led to walls, so I buried my questions deep. And yet, no matter how hard I tried to silence them, they grew louder with time. I became fascinated by other families. I would watch them at school pickup, the way siblings teased each other, the way fathers lifted their children onto their shoulders, the way mothers looked relaxed because they weren't carrying the entire weight of life alone. I envied them with a hunger that sometimes made me feel guilty, like I was betraying my mom by wishing for something more. When I was a teenager, the loneliness deepened. Friends invited me over for dinner, and I would sit at their tables, overwhelmed by the noise and chaos of big families, laughter, arguments, inside jokes. It felt like stepping into another world, one I wasn't a part of. I would smile and laugh along, but deep inside, I felt like an outsider looking through a window. And every time I came home, my mother's quiet apartment felt colder, emptier. The tragedy defined how people treated me too. Parents of my friends looked at me with pity. Teachers gave me extra attention, sometimes even favoritism, as if my loss gave me a permanent excuse to stumble. Strangers who learned my story would gasp softly and say things like, "You poor girl." I hated it. I didn't want to be pitied, but I didn't know how to be anything else. By the time I reached adulthood, I had built walls around myself. I didn't let people get too close. I didn't trust easily. I told myself that if tragedy could strike once, it could strike again, and the safest way to live was to expect abandonment. And yet, in quiet moments, I longed for connection. I longed for answers. I longed for the family I had never known. My mother noticed my restlessness, though she never acknowledged it directly. Instead, she tightened her grip on me. She reminded me constantly of how much she had sacrificed, how much she had lost, how I was all she had left. Her words felt like both love and chains. "Promise me, Sarah, you'll never leave me. Promise me you'll never go looking for trouble in the past. That's all gone. It's just us now." And I promised. I promised again and again, because what else could I do? She was my mother, the only person I had, but promises made in shadows rarely last forever. Even then, deep in my heart, I knew the silence wasn't natural. I knew there were cracks in the story. I just didn't yet know how deep they went, or how completely they would shatter my life when the truth finally came out. For most of my life, I carried my mother's version of events like a sacred text, never daring to question it. It was all I had, and to doubt her story felt like betraying her, betraying the bond we had built out of our shared pain. But as the years passed, small inconsistencies began to surface, tiny cracks in the foundation of the tragedy that had defined me. It started with a school project. I was 15, tasked with building a family history tree. Most of my classmates proudly brought in albums, certificates, faded photographs. I brought nothing. When I asked my mother if she could help, she grew tense, her face pale. "We don't have those things, Sarah," she said curtly, almost angrily. "Why dwell on ghosts?" "But Mom," I pressed, "can't we at least find a birth certificate for Dad? Or my brother? Or—" Her voice snapped like a whip. I said no. "Stop asking," I told myself. She was grieving, even after all these years. But part of me wondered, what kind of grieving mother throws away every single trace of her lost family? No photos, no documents, no mementos, not even a gravestone to visit. That thought gnawed at me. When I turned 17, I applied for a part-time job and needed my birth certificate. For the first time, I saw the official document with my own eyes. It listed my mother's name clearly. But in the line for father, instead of a name, it read only one word: unknown. My stomach twisted. My mother had always told me his name, David. But here it was, missing, erased, as though he had never existed. When I asked her about it, she froze, then forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It must be a clerical error," she said quickly, snatching the paper out of my hands. "Don't worry about it. Things like that happen, but mistakes like that didn't just happen. Not on something as official as a birth certificate." Later that same year, I overheard something that made my blood run cold. I was at my grandmother's house, helping her clean the kitchen. Her hands trembled as she washed dishes, and she mumbled to herself. At first, I didn't catch it, but then the words became clear. It was cruel, making her believe, "Poor Sarah. She'll hate us if she ever finds out." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to ask her what she meant, but before I could, my mother walked into the room. My grandmother went silent instantly, drying her hands as if nothing had happened. My mother gave me a sharp look, and I knew, whatever secret they were keeping it together. By the time I was 19, the doubts had grown too loud to ignore. I went digging, searching online for news articles about the supposed accident. If my entire family had been wiped out in one night, surely it would have made the paper. But search after search came up empty. No reports, no obituaries, no records at all. I confronted my mother about it one night, my voice trembling with fear and anger. "Why can't I find anything? Why doesn't Dad's name appear anywhere? Why aren't there records? If they died in an accident, why does no one know about it?" She slammed her hands on the table so hard the sound echoed through the room. "Enough!" she shouted, her eyes blazing with fury. "You don't need to know. Stop digging, Sarah. The past will only hurt you. You have me. That's all that matters." Her words silenced me in the moment, but inside something had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't sure if I could believe her anymore. Because the cracks in her story weren't just cracks. They were holes big enough to swallow the truth. And I had the sinking feeling that the truth, once I uncovered it, would destroy everything I thought I knew about who I was. I was 24 the night everything changed. By then, the cracks in my mother's story had become so wide that I could barely hold myself together. I lived in a constant state of unease, torn between loyalty to her and the gnawing sense that she had built my entire life on lies. I tried to bury myself in work, in friends, in the noise of daily life, but the silence always caught up to me. That night, I was walking home from the train station after a late shift. The streets were quiet, the kind of stillness that feels heavier than silence itself. A cold wind blew, carrying the scent of rain on asphalt. I wrapped my coat tighter around me, my footsteps echoing as I cut through a dimly lit street I didn't usually take. That's when I heard it. "Sarah?" The sound of my name stopped me in my tracks. A man's voice, low but certain, like someone who had been waiting to say it for years. I turned slowly, my heart thudding in my chest. A stranger stood a few feet away. He looked older than me, maybe early 30s, with tired eyes and a face that seemed oddly familiar, though I couldn't place why. He wasn't threatening, he just stood there, staring at me like he was seeing a ghost. "Do I know you?" I asked, my voice shaky. His lips parted, and for a long moment he didn't answer. Then, with a voice that trembled as though carrying the weight of decades, he said, "I'm your brother." The world seemed to tilt beneath me. I actually staggered back, my breath catching in my throat. "What?" I whispered. That's impossible. My brother died. He died in the accident. My mother told me." His face tightened. "There was no accident, Sarah. That's what she wanted you to believe. But I'm here. I've always been here. And I swear to you, I am your brother." My knees nearly buckled. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the alternative was screaming. "No," I said, shaking my head. "No, this is insane. Who are you really? What do you want from me?" He stepped closer, raising his hands like he didn't want to scare me. His voice was steady, though his eyes glistened with unshed tears. "My name is Daniel Reynolds, and I am your brother. You were 4 years old the last time I saw you. Mom took you away, told everyone we were gone, that we didn't exist anymore. But we've been here, Sarah. We never died." His words hit me like blows. My chest heaved, my ears rang, my body felt both frozen and on fire at the same time. I wanted to run, to scream, to disappear, but instead, I stood rooted to the spot, staring at this man who looked like a stranger, and yet carried something in his face, his jawline, his eyes, that mirrored mine. "I don't believe you," I whispered, but the conviction in my voice wavered. "You don't have to," he said softly, "but deep down, you already know. Haven't you wondered why there were no photos? No records? Haven't you felt the holes in her story?" I wanted to deny it, to cling to my mother's version of events, but I couldn't. The cracks I had spent years ignoring had just split wide open, and this man was stepping through them. I felt tears sting my eyes. "If you're really my brother, then why now? Why wait until now to come to me?" He looked away for a moment, his jaw tightening. "Because it wasn't safe before. Because she made sure we couldn't reach you. But things are different now. And you deserve to know the truth. The truth." The word echoed in my head, both terrifying and irresistible. That night, standing on a quiet street under the flickering glow of a street lamp, my world broke apart. I had spent 20 years mourning a family I thought I had lost. And now, in front of me, stood a man who claimed to be the brother I had grieved for. And though every instinct screamed at me not to trust him, another part of me, a part that had been silent all my life, recognized something in his voice, something real, something that felt like home. We stood there for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. The street was quiet, my pulse loud in my ears, my breath shallow as I faced this man who claimed to be my brother. A stranger, and yet not a stranger at all. Finally, I forced myself to speak. "If you really are who you say you are, then prove it. Tell me something only my brother would know." Daniel's expression softened, like he had been waiting for this question. "You had a stuffed rabbit. Its ear was torn off, and you wouldn't sleep without it. When Mom tried to throw it away, you cried until Dad sewed the ear back on with red thread. You still carried it everywhere, even when it looked like a rag." My mouth went dry. I hadn't thought about that rabbit in years. I barely remembered it myself. The only person who could have known that was someone who had been there. I staggered back, pressing my hand against the cold brick wall of the building behind me. How do you know that?" "Because I was there," he said simply. His voice cracked with emotion. "I was your big brother, Sarah. I was the one who carried you on my shoulders, the one who taught you how to skip stones at the lake, the one who promised I'd always protect you. And then one day, you were just gone. Mom took you away, and we never saw you again." His words sliced through me. My heart screamed at me to believe him, but my head clung desperately to the story my mother had drilled into me for decades. "That doesn't make sense," I whispered. "Mom said there was an accident." She said everyone died. Why would she say that if it wasn't true? Daniel's eyes darkened. He took a shaky breath before answering. Because she wanted to erase us. Because she didn't want you to know the truth about what happened. She made a choice to cut you off from us forever, and she built her whole life around that lie. The weight of his words nearly crushed me. But why? Why would she do that to me? To all of us? I don't know all of it, Daniel admitted, but I know this. There was no accident. I saw you alive. I watched Mom drive away with you, and I kept waiting for her to come back. But she never did. She told people she was starting over, that she couldn't live with us anymore. And she disappeared with you. We tried to find you for years, Sarah. We never stopped looking. I shook my head violently. No, that can't be true. She's my mother. She raised me. She sacrificed everything for me. She couldn't lie about something like that. He looked at me with such sadness that my chest ached. I know you love her. I know you trust her. But ask yourself this, why is there no record of the accident? Why is there no grave for Dad? Why are there no photos, no mementos, no proof of the family you supposedly lost? She erased us, Sarah. She erased the truth. His words landed like stones in my stomach. Every doubt I had ignored, every inconsistency I had brushed aside, suddenly roared back to life. The missing documents, the empty photo albums, my grandmother's trembling words, my mother's angry silence whenever I asked questions. It all fit together now in a way that terrified me. I can't, I whispered, my voice trembling. I can't just believe you. This is too much. I don't expect you to believe me right away, Daniel said gently. But I'm not lying. I am your brother, and I can prove it. I still have things, photos, documents, even Dad's old watch, things Mom never let you see. If you let me show you, you'll understand. My legs felt weak. I wanted to run back home, to crawl into bed and pretend this night had never happened. But I couldn't. His words had already taken root inside me, spreading through the cracks that had been growing for years. I looked at him, my eyes burning with tears. If what you're saying is true, then my whole life has been a lie. Daniel's voice softened. Not your life. Just the story Mom told you about it. And you deserve to know the truth. The truth. That word again. It both terrified me and pulled me closer, like a flame I couldn't resist. That night, as I walked home with my mind spinning and my body trembling, I realized nothing would ever be the same. I had spent 2 decades mourning ghosts. But maybe the ghosts weren't ghosts at all. Maybe they were alive, living, breathing people who had been stolen from me. And if that was true, then I needed to know everything, no matter how much it hurt. For days after that encounter, I couldn't think of anything else. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's face. The sadness in his eyes, the conviction in his voice, the way he had spoken about things no stranger could possibly know. It haunted me. I wanted desperately to dismiss him as a liar, some delusional man with nothing better to do than spin stories. But deep inside, I couldn't. Because his words had matched the cracks I had already seen in my mother's story. I needed proof, something undeniable, something solid I could hold in my hands. The first place I went was the library. I sat for hours in front of the glowing microfilm machine, scrolling through old newspapers from the year of the so-called accident. Page after page of car crashes, arrests, local tragedies. But nothing. No headline about a family wiped out on a rainy night. No obituary with my father's name. No funeral notices. Nothing. My hands shook as I flipped through each reel. How could an accident so devastating leave no trace? I turned next to public records. Birth certificates, death certificates, marriage licenses. I filed requests, paid fees, waited impatiently for results. Days later, the envelope arrived. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a single document, my birth certificate. My mother's name was there. But the space for father was blank, not deceased, not even a name crossed out. Just blank. That blank space felt like a scream. I stared at it for hours, my pulse racing. Why would she erase him completely? Even if he had died, Even if there had been an accident, his name should have been there. Unless the story itself was never true. I dug deeper. I searched for property records in my father's name, using David, the name my mother had given me, but nothing came up. It was as though he had never existed. Yet, when I tried searching for Reynolds, the surname Daniel had used, documents began to appear. A marriage certificate, my mother's name next to a man named Michael Reynolds. My father. My throat closed as I printed it out. She had told me his name was David. Why lie about something so basic? The next day, I couldn't resist any longer. I went to see Daniel. I needed answers. He welcomed me into a small, cluttered apartment on the edge of town. And there, spread across his coffee table, were the things I had been searching for my whole life. Photos, dozens of them. A man I instantly recognized as my father, standing tall with a kind smile. A little boy who looked just like Daniel, his arm wrapped around a younger girl. Me. Proof. Undeniable proof. My heart stopped as I picked up the photo. I was there. I was smiling, my hair tied in little pigtails sitting on Daniel's lap. My father stood behind us, his hands on our shoulders. Tears blurred my vision. This can't be real, I whispered. It is, Daniel said softly. Mom tried to erase us. But you were part of our family. You always were. He showed me more. Letters my father had written, receipts with my mother's name and his, documents tying them together. It was all there. The family I had been told was dead. My hands shook as I held each piece, my mind spinning. My mother hadn't just lied to me. She had built an entire world of fiction, trapping me inside it. She had buried a family that had been alive all along. On the way home that night, I felt like a ghost myself, like I didn't belong to the world I had been living in. Because if all of this was true, then the life I thought I knew had never been real. And worst of all, I realized something chilling. If my mother had lied about the accident, about their deaths, about my father's very name, what else had she hidden from me? The documents and photographs Daniel had shown me burned in my mind like fire. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. Every time I looked at my mother, I saw the lie wrapped around her like a second skin, and I couldn't take it anymore. I had lived 24 years in the shadows of her story, believing it was the truth. Now I knew better. One evening, after dinner, I sat across from her at the kitchen table. She was sipping her tea, flipping through the mail, as if nothing was wrong, as if the world wasn't crumbling under the weight of her secrets. My hands trembled as I placed the printed marriage certificate on the table between us. "Who is Michael Reynolds?" I asked quietly. Her hand froze mid-turn of a page. For a fraction of a second, her face drained of color. Then she forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Where did you hear that name?" she asked, her voice too calm. "I didn't just hear it," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "I found it. A marriage certificate with your name on it, and his, and then I saw the photos. Photos of me, with him, with Daniel. The air in the room seemed to thicken. My mother slowly set her teacup down, the clink of porcelain on wood echoing like a gunshot. "You've been talking to him," she whispered almost to herself. I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "So it's true?" "He is my brother." "And Dad?" "His name wasn't David. It was Michael." "Why did you lie to me? Why did you make me believe they were dead?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. She looked at me with eyes I barely recognized, cold, hard, calculating. For the first time in my life, I didn't see my mother. I saw a stranger. "You don't understand," she said finally. "You were too young. You couldn't possibly understand why I did what I did." "Then make me understand," I cried, slamming my hands on the table. "I've spent my whole life grieving people who weren't dead. I mourned a father I never knew. I lived with this emptiness because of you. Don't you dare sit there and act like I can't handle the truth. Tell me." Her hands tightened around the edge of the table. Her jaw clenched so hard I thought her teeth might crack. "I did it to protect you," she said flatly. The words hit me like ice water. Protect me? From what? From my own family? From a father who clearly loved me? From a brother who still remembers me after 20 years? You don't know him, she snapped, her mask slipping. You don't know what he's capable of. None of them were good for you. None of them. I had to take you away before they destroyed you. I stared at her, horrified. Destroyed me? Daniel is kind. He risked everything to find me. And Dad, Michael, he looked like a good man in those photos. What are you even talking about? Her chest rose and fell rapidly, like she was struggling to hold something back. For a moment I thought she might break, that she might finally tell me the whole truth. But then her face hardened again. You think you found answers, Sarah, she said, her voice cold as stone, but all you've done is open a door you should have left closed. Stop digging. I mean it. If you love me at all, if you want any kind of relationship with me, you will let this go. The silence that followed was unbearable. I stared at her, waiting for her to say more, waiting for the apology I would never get. But she just sat there, her eyes burning into mine, daring me to challenge her. Finally I stood, my chair scraping against the floor. My voice trembled, but my resolve was unshakable. No, Mom, I won't let it go. Not this time. You've lied to me my whole life, and I deserve the truth. Her lips parted, as if she wanted to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she turned her face away, her silence louder than any confession. That night, I realized something devastating. My mother was never going to tell me the truth willingly. If I wanted answers, I would have to find them myself. And for the first time, I saw her not as my protector, not as my grieving parent, but as the jailer who had locked me inside a lie. My mother's silence was more revealing than any confession. Her refusal to speak, her cold insistence that I let it go, told me everything. She was hiding something big, something so dangerous that she would rather shatter our relationship than allow me to uncover it. But once the seed of truth had been planted, there was no turning back. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus. Every moment of my life felt split in two, the one I had lived under my mother's story, and the one that was only just beginning to emerge through fragments, documents, and Daniel's words. I needed answers, real answers, so I began to dig. The first place I went was the county courthouse. The clerk at the records office was bored and slow, but eventually, after hours of waiting, I held in my hands a folder containing property deeds, marriage licenses, and tax records under the name Michael Reynolds, my father's name. Seeing it printed in black ink made him real in a way he had never been before. There it was, the house where he had lived, the address burned into my mind. A house not 10 miles from where I grew up. For years, while I mourned him, while I believed he was buried in the ground, he had been living his life within driving distance. The realization made me dizzy. Next, I tracked down newspaper archives beyond the local library, regional publications, small-town bulletins, even church newsletters. And there, buried in a community announcement section, I found it. A photograph of Michael Reynolds shaking hands with a city councilman. The caption read, "Local businessman Michael Reynolds donates to the new youth center fund." My breath caught. My father, alive, smiling, kind, a man of the community, but the date on the article was years after the so-called accident. I printed it and shoved it into my growing folder of evidence. The more I found, the more desperate I became. I started calling numbers from old directories, tracking down anyone who might have known him. Most calls led nowhere. Disconnected numbers, wrong addresses, wrong. But one afternoon, an elderly woman answered. Her name was Mrs. Callahan, and when I asked if she had known Michael Reynolds, her voice brightened. "Oh yes," she said warmly. "Michael was a wonderful man, always spoke so proudly of his children, his boy Daniel and his little girl." Her voice trailed off. "What little girl?" I asked, my pulse pounding. She hesitated. "Why are you asking, dear?" "Because I'm her," I whispered, my throat tight. "I'm his daughter." The line went silent, then softly. We all thought you'd gone. That you and your mother, well, none of us ever understood. One day you were there, the next day you weren't. Michael was devastated. Her words shook me to my core. My father had spoken about me. He had loved me. He had mourned me like I was dead, even though I was alive. When I hung up the phone, my hands were trembling so badly I nearly dropped it. Piece by piece, the truth was emerging. My mother hadn't just lied, she had stolen me. She had ripped me away from a father who loved me, from a brother who never stopped searching for me, from an entire family and community who remembered me. I started visiting the old neighborhood where Michael had lived. Walking those streets felt surreal, like entering a parallel universe where I was supposed to belong but didn't. Neighbors eyed me curiously, some with recognition they couldn't quite place, others with suspicion. I knocked on doors, asked cautious questions, and sometimes I saw it, the flicker in their eyes when they looked at me. A memory of a little girl with pigtails, now grown. Every new fragment I collected felt like a shard of glass, sharp, painful. But together, they began to form a picture, the picture of a life I had been meant to live, and yet every discovery deepened the questions I couldn't answer. Why had my mother done it? Why had she taken me away, cut me off, and fed me lies for decades? What had she been protecting me from or hiding from me? The deeper I dug, the more terrified I became that the truth, when I finally unearthed it, would not just shatter the past. It might destroy my future, too. After the fight with my mother, after her icy silence and veiled threats, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was never going to tell me the truth. Whatever secrets she was keeping, she would take them to her grave before admitting them to me. But I couldn't live like that anymore. I couldn't keep pretending I was whole when inside I was shattered, torn between two versions of my life, the one I had been told, and the one that was slowly revealing itself through Daniel's words. If my mother wasn't going to tell me, then I would find the answers myself. And so, I began my search. At first, I started small. I dug through the boxes in our attic, the ones my mother never let me touch. Dust clung to my fingers as I pried them open, expecting maybe old school projects or yellowing newspapers. Instead, I found emptiness, boxes that should have held family albums and keepsakes filled instead with random junk. Old bills, empty envelopes, broken trinkets. It felt deliberate, like someone had cleaned them out long ago. Still, in the corner of one box hidden under scraps of paper, I found something. A Polaroid photo. It was faded and bent, but the image was clear. A man holding a little girl in his arms. She was no older than 3 or 4, her hair in pigtails, her eyes wide with joy. The man had strong features and a warm smile, his arm wrapped protectively around her. The little girl was me. And the man, though I had never seen his face before, had Daniel's same eyes. My heart slammed against my ribs as I clutched the photo. Proof that someone else existed, that my life hadn't been the way my mother claimed. She had missed this photo when she scrubbed the past clean. I tucked it into my jacket and didn't tell her what I had found. From there, my search grew bolder. I visited the county courthouse requesting access to old records. I spent hours hunched over tables, the smell of ink and dust filling my nose as I flipped through pages of birth certificates, marriage licenses, property deeds. And then, I found it, a marriage certificate dated before I was born, my mother's name. Next to it, another, Michael Reynolds. Not David, the name she had always told me. Michael. I sat frozen in the fluorescent-lit records office, staring at the paper until my vision blurred. My mother had lied about his name. Something so basic, so simple, she had twisted into fiction. Why? To make it harder for me to ever find him? I copied the record, my hands shaking, and stuffed it into a folder I had started carrying everywhere with me. The more I uncovered, the more desperate I became. I spent late nights scouring old newspaper archives. I searched for reports of the accident she always spoke about, the tragedy that had supposedly killed my father and my brother. But there was nothing. No article, no obituary, no trace. If it had really happened, it would have been newsworthy. Whole families don't just vanish in accidents without anyone noticing. And then, buried deep in a community newspaper, I found something that nearly made me stop breathing, an article from years after the supposed accident. The photo showed a man, my father, Michael Reynolds, shaking hands with a local councilman. The headline read, "Local Businessman Supports Youth Center Fund." The date was undeniable. It was from years after the day my mother told me he had died. My stomach churned. I pressed my trembling fingers against the photo on the page. Alive. He had been alive. All those years I spent mourning him. All those nights I cried into my pillow wishing I had known him. He had been alive, walking, breathing, smiling, and my mother had known. She had chosen to bury him in my mind. Fueled by both fury and desperation, I went further. I searched for neighbors from that old address. I knocked on doors. Most of them were empty houses or new families who knew nothing. But one afternoon, an elderly woman answered, her kind eyes narrowing as she studied me. "You look familiar," she said softly. "Have we met?" "My name is Sarah," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm looking for information about Michael Reynolds. Did you know him?" Her face lit up. "Of course. He was a good man, always talked about his children, Daniel, and his little girl." Her words hit me like a freight train. "His little girl," I whispered. "Yes, his daughter. You're her, aren't you?" Tears stung my eyes. I nodded, unable to speak. The woman, Mrs. Callahan, invited me inside, poured me tea, and told me stories. How Michael used to carry me on his shoulders. How Daniel, just a boy himself, would chase after me in the yard. How neighbors adored us, because Michael was always so generous, so kind. Then her voice dropped. "And then, one day, you were just gone. Your mother packed up and disappeared. We never saw you again. Michael was broken. He looked for you. He begged for answers. But you were gone." I left her house trembling, the weight of her words pressing down on me like stone. My mother hadn't just lied. She had stolen me. She had erased an entire family from my life, and then had the audacity to claim it was to protect me. As I walked back home, clutching the folder filled with documents, photographs, and now a stranger's testimony, one thought echoed louder than the rest. If she had lied about the accident, if she had lied about my father, if she had lied about my brother, then what else had she lied about? And was I even ready for the answer? The folder I had built was already thick, its seams straining under the weight of every document, photo, and testimony I had gathered. But even with all of it, I still felt like I was holding puzzle pieces without the box cover. I could see fragments of the truth, but the full picture remained hidden, blurry, terrifying. One thing was clear. The past wasn't buried. It was alive, waiting for me to dig deeper. And I couldn't stop now, not when I was so close. Through Mrs. Callahan, I got another lead. She mentioned that one of my father's closest friends still lived in town, a man named Robert Ellis. He had worked with my father, she said, and had been there during the darkest days, after I disappeared. It took me 3 tries to find his house, a modest single-story home with peeling paint and a sagging porch. My hands were sweaty as I knocked on the door, unsure of what to expect. The door creaked open, and an older man appeared. His hair was gray, his posture bent, but his eyes were sharp. He studied me for a long moment before speaking. "You must be Sarah," he said. I froze. How do you know my name?" He sighed. "Because you look just like your mother. And because Michael never stopped talking about you." The words hit me like a blow. He stepped aside and gestured for me to enter. Inside, the house smelled faintly of dust and old books. The walls were lined with framed photos, most of them black and white, some in fading color. And on one shelf, I saw it, a framed picture of my father, smiling with his arm around Robert, both younger and full of life. I sank into a chair at his urging, my fingers gripping the folder in my lap. "I need to know the truth," I said, my voice trembling. "Please, tell me what really happened." Robert leaned back, his gaze heavy. For a long moment he didn't answer. Then slowly he began to speak. Your father was one of the best men I ever knew. Strong, loyal, stubborn as hell, but always trying to do right by his family. When you were born, he lit up in a way I'd never seen before. He adored you, and Daniel, of course. His kids were his world. Tears stung my eyes, but I forced myself to stay quiet. But then, things at home got complicated, Robert continued. Your mother? She and Michael fought, a lot. About money, about his long work hours, about raising you kids. But there was more to it. She was restless, always wanting something different, something more. Michael used to say she was like a bird that couldn't stay in one cage for long. I swallowed hard. So she left? Robert shook his head. Not at first. But then, one day she just vanished. Took you with her. No warning, no goodbye. Michael came to me frantic. He thought maybe she'd gone to her family or to some old friend, but she cut all ties, disappeared like smoke. My chest tightened. I gripped the folder so hard my knuckles turned white. He searched for you, Robert said softly. God, how he searched. He went to the police, but because it was your mother who had taken you, they called it a domestic matter. Said their hands were tied. He put up flyers, hired private investigators, begged for help. He was a broken man, Sarah. Broken. He never forgave himself for not stopping her that night. My throat closed. But she told me there was an accident. That you all died. Why would she lie like that? Robert's expression hardened. Because the truth didn't suit her. Because she wanted a clean slate. And because... He hesitated, then lowered his voice. Because she didn't want you to know the kind of man she really was. A chill ran down my spine. What do you mean? He looked me straight in the eye. She wasn't just restless. She was unfaithful. She was seeing someone else. A man your father knew. When Michael found out, it nearly destroyed him. And I think that's why she left. She didn't want to face what she had done. So she ran. And she made sure you would never come back. I sat frozen, my mind spinning, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. My mother, my protector, my only family, hadn't just lied. She had cheated, betrayed, abandoned, and then rewritten history to make herself look like the victim. Robert's voice softened. Your father wasn't perfect. He had his flaws, but he loved you. He loved you more than anything. And he died with that ache still in his heart, still hoping you'd come home someday. Tears streamed down my face, hot and unstoppable. I left Robert's house with my folder heavier than ever, my mind a hurricane of rage and grief. Every step I took felt like I was walking away from the girl I had been, the girl who believed her mother's story, who thought she was alone in the world, because now I wasn't alone. I had a brother. I had a father who had loved me. I had a past full of people who had fought to keep me, even when my mother ripped me away. And I had a new, terrifying understanding. My mother's lies weren't just about protection. They were about her choices, her betrayal, her selfishness. The truth wasn't just painful, it was devastating. And I knew the next step was unavoidable. I would have to confront her again. And this time, I wouldn't let her hide behind silence. The night before I confronted my mother, I barely slept. I lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word I had heard from Daniel, from Mrs. Callahan, from Robert Ellis. Each story matched. Each piece of evidence fit into place, forming a picture I could no longer deny. The photo of my father holding me in his arms, the marriage certificate with his real name, the community article proving he had lived years after I thought he had died, the testimony of neighbors who remembered me, remembered us, and Daniel, the brother I had grieved for, the brother who had never stopped searching. The folder sat heavy on my nightstand, a silent witness to the life I had been denied. By morning, I knew what I had to do. When I walked into the kitchen, my mother was at the stove, humming quietly as she stirred her coffee. To anyone else, it would have looked like an ordinary morning. But to me, it felt like standing on the edge of a battlefield. I set the folder down on the table with a loud thump. She turned, frowning at the sound. "What's this?" "Proof," I said, my voice trembling but steady. "Proof of everything you've hidden from me." Her eyes flickered to the folder, then back to me. "Sarah, we've been through this." "No," I snapped, cutting her off. My voice rose, years of pain boiling to the surface. "We haven't. Not really. You've yelled, you've gone silent, you've told me to stop asking. But you've never told me the truth. And now I have it. All of it." I pulled out the photo of my father, sliding it across the table. "You said he was dead. You said he died in an accident. But here he is, alive, holding me, smiling." Her hand shook as she looked at the picture. I pulled out the marriage certificate. "You said his name was David. But it wasn't. It was Michael. You lied about his name, about everything." I pulled out the article. "You said he was gone before I could remember him. But here, years later, he was alive, active in the community, donating money, being a good man." My voice cracked, but I pressed on. "And Daniel, you told me I had no one. You made me think my brother died, but he's alive. He remembers me. He never stopped looking for me." My mother's face was pale, her lips trembling. "Sarah, please." "Why?" I screamed, slamming my fists on the table. "Why would you do this to me? Why would you rip me away from him, from Dad, from everyone who loved me? Why would you make me grieve people who were still alive?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Because I had no choice." "Yes, you did," I spat. "You always had a choice. And you chose to lie. You chose to erase them. You chose to erase me." Her voice broke, but her words came out sharp. "I did it to protect you. You don't understand what kind of man Michael really was. What kind of family that was." "That's a lie," I shouted back. "I've spoken to people who knew him. Who knew us? He loved me. He adored us. He searched for me until the day he died. Don't you dare stand there and tell me he didn't care." She crumbled then, her shoulders shaking as tears streamed down her face. "He wasn't perfect, Sarah. Neither was I. But you were mine. I couldn't share you. I couldn't let him raise you. I wanted you all to myself." The confession cut through me like a knife. She hadn't done it to protect me. She had done it to protect herself, out of selfishness, out of fear. I stood there, trembling, staring at the woman I had called my mother all my life, the woman who had fed me, clothed me, cared for me, and lied to me every single day. "I don't even know who you are," I whispered. She reached for me, her face crumpled with desperation. "I'm your mother. I raised you. I did everything for you." I stepped back. "No, you didn't do everything for me. You did everything for yourself. You stole my father. You stole my brother. You stole my family. You made me live in grief when I didn't have to." Her hand dropped. Her tears fell harder. For a long moment, the kitchen was silent except for her sobbing. My chest ached, torn between fury and heartbreak. Finally, I picked up the folder, clutching it to my chest like armor. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you. Maybe one day, maybe never. But I'm done living in your lies. From now on, I'll find the truth for myself." Her face twisted in pain, but I didn't stay to watch. I walked out of the kitchen, out of the house, into the bright morning sun. The folder was heavy in my arms, but for the first time, it felt like it belonged to me. The truth was mine now, and even though it had shattered everything I thought I knew, it also set me free.